Welcome to the new video of the Tokio async IO implementation of agents. We are going to make the project a bit more complex to show the interaction of different agents and how to, for example, store state in certain agents and drive other agents. And we're going to assume essentially we have an online source which produces like changing subjects over time. And we need to essentially consume messages from those subjects. And let's say this online source has an endpoint which says, okay, we have different subjects we can read. And then we have other endpoints, essentially like WebSocket interface, that actually subscribes to those subjects and starts reading out these messages. And this means essentially we're going to create two more agents. One is the MessageSubjectScanner, and we have a message recorder spawner. And the MessageSubjectScanner's responsibility is to essentially poll on an interval to get the current list of subjects, right? And this is changing, because let's say subjects get active and some subjects don't get active. He will push this to the message recorder spawner, and this spawner will listen for messages for the MessageSubjectScanner. So it will listen for updates, and when it receives an update, it will either kill or spawn new message recorders. So a very simple, essentially, interconnection of three different agents, and then essentially, but then even two more, because a message recorder is of course a system on its own that spans a message generator in this case, and a file sync. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's start. So we start by making the file MessageSubjectScanner. And include the random libraries, because we need some random generation of different kinds of course, let's say subjects. So let's make a list of subjects as a static global variable, just because we can, right? So as you can see, this is a static lifetime string, and we're going to use like the very simple orange apples comparison. And we are going to include essentially a module in the project. So we're making the data structure, which holds like a subject. And now we're essentially creating a constructor, which essentially takes a MessageSubjectScanner back. And we're now just copying over essentially everything from message recorder, right? Because we already thought about this. This is what I like to do, like the structure. And we're starting to see emerging already, let's say, repeating patterns, right? Like the same control messages, the same control responses. But in this case, we just don't want to like simplify things, right? Because the only thing we need here is just like a quit message, because we don't need the health of this thing, right? It's just going to push essentially messages like for now, right? It's only going to push essentially these subjects to our essentially spawner, right? The agent responsible for spawning different recorders, and we're just like adding here all the different dependencies, fixing some stuff, especially here, right? And we need to essentially just replace, so search and replace. And again, we see already here like arising some repeating structures. And once we finish this implementation, we can look at maybe making this like more generic in a sense, because this looks like a producer thing that only needs a control channel, right? So we probably don't need to make this code every time, right? Maybe we can just say, okay, just produce these values on these channels, and then when you get quit, then that's okay. Or maybe we can just say, like, if the final channel just closes down, then it's good. So here, essentially, we already starting to abstract it away, so not like using the term agent loop, because every agent essentially, when starting up, spawns an agent loop, which is responsible for reading messages and responding to it, right? And here, essentially, we're building the return structure, the MessageSubjectScanner, with a control channel and an output channel. And we're here essentially defining the different types that belong to different, let's say, data types. And now we're essentially using the same naming, and this already starts feeling like we discovered here some kind of interface, because like the scanner is an agent and it has a spawn function, but also it needs to essentially accept control messages. But this is a variation, because we don't want any responses. Let's say, so no one-shot channels, which we covered in the previous episode if you didn't see it. So essentially just testing if everything works. And now, of course, we need to build some random subjects every time. So how are we going to do this, right? So here the random shuffle comes into play. So what we're essentially doing is, okay, we're converting this, let's say, array into a vector, and we try to shuffle it, right? So here we're playing a bit with the interfaces. To shuffle, I discovered while implementing it, mutates essentially the subject vector. So I'm struggling here a bit, essentially finding that out, but here I found it out. So essentially here we need a repeating thread RNG, which is essentially included from the preload.random. And here we're essentially taking, we're first shuffling, and then we're based on the RNG, then we're taking essentially a certain num essentially of subjects, and then essentially we're returning this, because I want to have like always a different kind of range. So sometimes I want one subject, then I want two, maybe I want four, maybe I want five. So our spawner can actually create but also destroy essentially different kind of processes. And we want to see it happening, right? We want to see this thing working. And immediately the other question arises, okay, and that's maybe also a nice episode. So we're making all these async functions, but we also want to test them, of course, right? And let's say Tokio has some really nice testing features, which we will be covering in another episode, essentially, of this series. But here I figured the stuff out, right? So we have like two ways of iteration. We have dot iter, right, which is an more ad hoc implementation, and it doesn't really take into account the context. So it's always like by convention, it always gives like the values by reference. And into iter has essentially often multiple implementations, because it's being used to, if you want to use a value essentially inside a for loop, right? And it means essentially that it needs to handle more cases, so it takes into account the context. That's the major difference. So let's just execute a test, and we see that the output is still the same as used to. So we have like a compiling file. And so just a recap. We have now created a MessageSubjectScanner, which is will pull on the interval, right, to get the current list of subjects, and it's just all simulated essentially by a random shuffle and a take of the amount of elements we have in the thing, and we are in the vector. And essentially what we're now going to do is we're going to send this, and that's next episode, into a message recorder spawner, who will do some logic based on what is spawned at this moment and what should be spawned, and will kill and start based on this data. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I hope to see you again in the next episode.